Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Oil Valley Film Festival 6th edition, the 2021 edition of the Oil Valley Film Festival. It is my privilege and pleasure to introduce you to screenwriter Jason Usry. Jason, how are you?
Great. Good to see you, Matt.
It's really good to see you too. We've known each other for quite a while. We've been online buddies for probably over a decade now, from back in the Trigger Street days. And it's been fun for me to not only, have people see me develop the film festival over the past 6 years, but it's also been great for me to watch friends like you go ahead and start writing some really cool stuff and getting it out there into the world. And that's just, it's super exciting to see that happen. So
I appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. So why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? Just let everybody know where you're from, where you went to school, or where you're based out of now, I guess.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I'm Jason Usry. I was born in Dothan, Alabama, which has a great peanut festival, I hear. But we moved before I was old enough to enjoy that. We moved around a lot when I was a kid. My dad ran grocery stores, and he was kind of like I didn't even know they had these, a grocery store fixer. So
yes.
if there was a problem, if a store had a hard time in sales or whatever, his company would ship him to a different, to whatever the location that needed help. So we moved around quite a bit when I was a kid, but I ended up back in Dothan when I was in kindergarten, and then moved around lower Alabama. For a few years. Ended up in a town called Cairo, Georgia, in the third grade, and there our mascot was the syrup makers, which looked a lot like the Kool-Aid pitcher guy,
right? The guy busting through the wall.
Exactly. We did sort of the same thing.
That guy.
Yes. And so I went to high school through in Cairo, and then when I graduated high school, I wrote my first screenplay when I was 17. So and I can go back and talk about that, but just to give you the forward background.
Yeah.
Weird, but I wrote my first screenplay when I was 17. So I wanted to get into some sort of film program. But I ended up getting a business scholarship, a scholarship to go to business school at a place called Thomas University, which was in Thomasville, Georgia, which was kind of the neighboring town. And I got that because in my interview, I had said that I wanted to be a filmmaker, but that I would start, because I was trying to get the money for the scholarship, on the business side, and I would work on the creative side on the side. So I got the scholarship. I went there for a few semesters, but the books and fees were very expensive. So my scholarship covered tuition, as
college normally is. It's all those extra things that you don't even consider or think about when you're like, I'm going to go to college.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I was working at Walmart and the produce department to kind of pay for these things. But Georgia had a thing called the Hope Scholarship, and that provided for tuition, covered fees, and it also gave you a stipend for books. So I ended up transferring to Valdosta State University, and there I made the switch from the business program into the media program. Oddly enough, because I blush really bad. Okay, like if I get embarrassed, like I turn beet red. And I was in a business management class, and I was writing a screenplay by hand. I was working on it by hand during class, and the professor called on me to answer a question and completely embarrassed me.
You were obviously just blanked out because your mind was focused on the story, what you were writing.
And when he called me out on it, man, I turned that dark red. And I remember I walked out of that class that day, and Valdosta State at the time, I don't know if it still does, had kind of two campuses. There was the business classes were on North Campus, and then the media building was on the main campus. So I walked out of that classroom, I got on the bus, I took the bus back down to the main campus, and I walked into the media building, and this was at, whatever, 7 o'clock at night or whatever.
Right.
And there was one light on in the building, and it was a guy named Mike Savoy, who I told that I wanted to transfer into the media department. And he told me I was making a big mistake, but that he had done sort of the same sort of thing during his college career. Right. And he let me in the program. So that's how I got into that. And, I got to get my hands on gear immediately, and I got to write, and I talked them into letting me write and produce a short film, and it was cool. I was very fortunate to get a chance.
So why don't you let the folks know where you are based out of now?
Yes, so I'm in Savannah, Georgia. I've lived here for about 16 years, since 2005, 16 and a half years or so. It is, of course, Georgia is a major movie making hub now.
Yes, it is.
A lot of that's based in Atlanta, but we're seeing a lot more projects come this way as well. So
Savannah always seemed absolutely gorgeous to me in photos, and I've never actually spent any time in Savannah itself.
You have to come down. The photos do not do it justice. It's amazing. It's beautiful. The history here is incredible. It's a great town.
That's fantastic. So what projects would people know you from?
So I've had a couple of things produced. The first one was a movie ended up being called Running from My Roots. It was a family film. Initially, when the producer reached out to me, it was called Take Two for Faith. And the movie at the time, when they came to me, they wanted to change the direction of it a little bit. Yeah. Was a movie about an actress who fame effectively became too much for her. So she goes back to her hometown. She reconnects with an old flame. The old flame is actually a pastor of a local church that's failing, and she comes in with her celebrity and helps kind of revive, the church. We took it, when I got it, I took it a little bit different way to the girl Faith being a country music star. So we were able to get some country music and that sort of thing in it.
Right.
So that was the first one. Then after that, I worked on a project, which was an original idea between me and the same producer who also directed this project. Was called Dead Water. And it's some
pretty big stars in that one.
Yeah, Casper Van Dien and Judd Nelson were both in that. Griff First was a big proponent of that project, and it was interesting because Chris Helton, who's the director and producer of that project, he and I have been buddies for almost as long as you and I have been buddies, really. Okay. The only difference was he was based here in Savannah, and I'd met him at a networking event downtown, and he was talking about wanting to bring a studio to Savannah. And this was back before it was even fashionable. I mean, this was 2006, 2007. Yeah. And I was like, I want to know this guy. And so he and I became buddies, and I had written a couple screenplays for him that, we had options on. We never were able to get the money put together for it. Right. And so he's like, one day he called me out of the blue. He said, hey, I've got an investor that's interested in putting some money into a film. What do you have for this budget range? And I said, really not really anything, but we can write something. And so he and I met at a Starbucks, and we talked about, we sat down and he goes, okay, so what are we going to do? I said, well, with this budget, we got to have limited cast, limited locations. And he said, and this was the worst idea ever, and I tell him this to this day, he's like, let's put them on a boat. And we're like, yeah, how hard could that be?
Let's put them on a boat.
Yeah. So never put them on a boat. And so anyhow, I went away and I wrote we came up with a few ideas. I wrote a treatment, sent it back to him. He made some comments. We argued about it for a month. Yeah. Before we finally came together on sort of the base story. And then I went away and wrote the screenplay. And then he took it to the financier, and the financier was like, I don't want to invest in films anymore. I want to go invest in real estate. So we're like, well, crap. So that project sat on the shelf for a few months,
right.
Maybe closer to a year. And there was another individual who came forward and said, he worked with Chris on a different project, and said that he wanted to invest some money, and he liked the script and everything. And so we were able to get the money together for that. And he shot that in St. Croix. I didn't get to go down for the actual production, but we shot in St. Croix. We were on the phone effectively every night because we were doing rewrites on scenes.
Now, you also served as an executive producer on the film as well. So
yeah, I mean, I've been there with Chris from the beginning. I put a little bit of my own financial, stake in it. And I was there, kind of a whisper in his ear, quite a bit throughout the process. And, like I said, we were rewriting scenes. We had different picture boats that we had planned for. And then there was a different boat when we got down there. Yes. So I had to
ultimately you did end up putting them on a boat.
Yes. It was just wasn't the same boat we thought. Right. So, but all those challenges were great. It just, it's all part of the process. So it was fun.
So let's take a step backward. You had mentioned earlier that you were 17 years old when you wrote your first script. What was that screenplay? What was it about when you were 17? I mean, because and I guess a two-parter to that is, did you struggle with the format at the beginning like a lot of early screenwriters do?
Yes. So it's kind of a cheesy, goofy story, but as many 17-year-old guys are, they are, doing things for love and that sort of thing. Right, of course. So my girlfriend and I, a high school girlfriend and I, had gone to see this. There was this movie, I don't know if you heard of it, it's called Titanic. Okay.
I think I've heard of that. Yeah, right. I think little movie called Titanic.
Yeah. So we went down to this theater down in the first time we saw it a couple of times. The first time we saw it in this theater in Thomasville, Georgia, which I mentioned earlier. And it's a for all the things that can be said about it, it's a very well made movie. But what I found myself really engaged with was the audience's relationship with that movie.
Yeah.
That the people were seeming to really react and respond to it. A collective group of people. I grew up in the South, and there are certain prejudices that I've seen throughout my lifetime, and that was the first time I'd seen a singular piece of art, entertainment impact an audience in a real way, where everybody, no matter their age, no matter their race, no matter who they identified as, we're all reacting the same way to this movie.
Everybody can pull from it the same exact, you're just losing yourself and you're Absolutely. All becoming audience members together, and that's Absolutely. A great thing.
Yeah, and that's when I think I realized that that's the power of I recognize as a power of filmmaking and movies, but really all art, has that.
Right. Yeah, I agree.
Kind of transformative power. And so I walked away from it that night, and I was like, I'm going to write movies. That's exactly what I'm going to do. So I did not have a computer at the time, but I did have a notepad and paper, and I started writing on a notepad and paper. So that was in December. When I got my little $200 income tax refund,
right?
In whatever March or February or March, whatever it was, I went to Walmart and I bought one of those word processors where you could only see the one line of text.
Yeah, yes, I remember. I had one of those in college, I think, in my dorm room.
And I wrote this crazy long screenplay. The first draft was not formatted at all right. It was also like 175 pages.
Wow, that is long.
Yeah, and reading it one line at a time too. But it was the first thing I would always like to write, but I could never finish what I wanted to start out. Like,
Yeah.
I had a block.
I think I still, even to this day, have more of those than I do things that are completed. It's like,
sure.
Yeah, I think that's like all writers are like that.
Right. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, if you read it, it's unfortunate. I did finish that one. And then it just kind of sparked this. I was like, oh, I finished it. And then I started kind of diving into, like the craft of it, and reading books and reading other screenplays, and then taking the screenplay and watching the movie side by side and trying to understand how the written word related to what ended up on the screen. That
actual that full process works. Yeah. I understand what you're saying.
So yeah, that's.
So do you have how have you developed your process over the years as a writer? So like when it comes to developing a story, do you have a specific process that you follow? Do you have certain things that are catalysts for inspiration for your stories? And what does that process consist of?
Yeah, I mean, I think it differs with every project for me. And it's also, as I've gotten older, I've become a lot more organized with the way that I approach writing.
Right.
But I've had things where, I've been in the shower and I've just thought of a cool movie trailer, and then I go out and I write those components, and I'm like, all right, how can I connect these dots? And I've written a couple of one of the screenplays that did really well on Trigger Street was this one called Red Roger, and that's how that project came to be. There's another screenplay that did well on that. It's done well in some contests, which is titled Free. That one I literally sat down like on the weekend before Christmas and wrote, straight through effectively 115 pages.
Yeah.
And it was just, it just kind of poured out of me. Now, I have to have kind of a good idea, a good hook. And then I just start, the outline process. I start the treatment process. And then once I have a solid treatment kind of in hand, then I can go back and actually write the first draft of the screenplay, and then come back and certainly do a lot of rewriting on the back side.
Yeah, reattack it, if you will. So you being the family person that you are, which is amazing. So like, where does writing fall into your schedule then? Like, if you say you have a project that's going, do you have certain hours set aside that you write? How does that work?
So, yeah. So, I've had people ask me when I have the time to do these things. And the truth is, I just find the time. If there's a project that it really, really is rattling around up here, I'll have to get it out. Most of the time that's early in the morning. Like I'm up really early in the mornings, this past, on Sunday, I was up at 2:00 in the morning. So I went to bed at like 10, on Saturday night, and I woke up at 2, and I worked from 2 until about 8 on a screenplay project that I'm working on. And then I, played with my little boy, and we, did all the things. I mowed the yard, I did all that stuff. And then I took a little bit of a nap in the afternoon. And then, later in the evening, last night I reattacked some of it. So that's the way it works. A lot of time, a lot of it's, I go to bed early, or 10 o'clock, 10:30 early. And then I get up at 2 or 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning and work for a few hours before I have to kind of attack my day.
But you're finding you're making the time because it's something that is imperative for you to do.
Yeah, it's a priority. I work in my day job is I work in for a local TV affiliate. Mm-hmm. And so that's your standard, 45 to 55, 60-hour work week for me. But and while that's great because it is a creative job, I am kind of in a box in a lot of ways in what I can do there. for me, I get a lot of satisfaction with these stories that are mine, or with these stories that I'm collaborating with other people on. And so it gives me a lot of energy to finish those things. And as I have that opportunity to, tell those stories and feel that, excitement, I really do just try to make some time for it. And sometimes it's, it might not be going to bed early, it might be staying up late, and then kind of getting up a little closer to 6 a.m. and doing my day. And it is just kind of finding the time.
Right. So talk to me about writing during this pandemic. I asked Natalie this when I interviewed her, and does the current situation of the world affect the way that you write? Do you feel like maybe, because I've had a lot of anxiety during this pandemic, and I find that it's been harder for me to write. And it's a time where I should be writing a lot because, I have the time to do it. So has it affected the way that you write, or your headspace as far as writing goes?
Yeah, I think it has a little bit. When it first, kind of last spring, when this was all very new, I had talked to Chris Helson, who we talked about earlier, and we would talked about, hey, maybe this is a time for us to collaborate on a story idea. And he pitched an idea to me, and I took it kind of in a different direction, and I wrote a kind of a limited location sort of Southern Gothic horror film that we were real close to making last fall, and the money fell apart at the last minute and whatever, so it has not been made yet. But so early on, I was really kind of, I don't know if I got a lot of inspiration out of that kind of collective anxiety. I thought of a lot of ways that people would, kind of react in this scenario, and I had a lot of ideas with how that could work in a screenplay. So for me, the anxiety of it at that point of the pandemic did not really hit me. Now later on, especially because in my day job, I am constantly confronted with, I work in the news business. I'm not on the news side, I'm on the creative side, but I'm, seeing, I saw the pandemic in a really up close way. I saw the protests and the racial injustice, in a really close way. I saw all the ugliness of the political season in a really ugly way. And now we're back again to, the pandemic, and now the vaccine and how people are reacting to these things. And so I saw a lot of ugliness in that, and still do, for that amount of time. And I think over the course of that, I have seen, my productivity drop off some.
It's exhausting. I mean, it's mentally exhausting. It really is.
Yeah. So yeah, and I don't know how, it's been, because like you said, there has been a lot more sort of time, I think, because, you're not going out, you're not going to do, hanging out with your friends, a couple times a week, or we're not going, to restaurants or things like that. So we're eating, we're getting, an hour and a half here or there, where we might. And
that does add up.
Absolutely.
And it's just been a strange time.
It's very weird. Very weird.
What's on the slate for you next? Do you have anything that's lined up right now? Are you working towards maybe doing some? I mean, again, because of this pandemic, we still don't know. It's hard to put something on, on a calendar and go like, we're gonna have this done by this, this date, or we're gonna start shooting something on this date, because all of that stuff is pliable and flexible now because of the current situation that we're in. Do you have anything that you are working towards at this point right now?
Well, so the Shallow, the movie that I wrote last May, that we were going to shoot last year, that's still very much in play. We have people that are motivated to be a part of that project. We just need someone to be motivated to put money into it, again. So there's that project. I'm working on another project with a young producer who's based in LA right now. I've got another project that I'm working with a producer he lives in Italy, but he kind of travels back and forth between the States and Italy. That project is done. Could use a rewrite, but it's sort of out there floating around. I have a couple of other ideas that I really want to develop. One of them is a horror comedy. One of them is a low budget horror film that I've written, half of. I just need to finish it. One of them is sort of another limited location horror film. And then I've sort of shifted because I have a production background. And I was sort of thinking early on in the pandemic also, what could I do? How could I produce, something? I got into some podcast work, and I've been editing podcasts. Yeah. And so now I'm writing a true crime satire podcast that
that's fantastic.
Yeah, it's going to release in November on Black Friday. It's called Santa May Be a Criminal.
Where can people go to listen to that?
It'll be everywhere. It'll be on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify, on Stitcher, on all of them.
Okay.
But it's sort of like if it's like a Southern themed sort of like amateur Dateline set in the South, with Santa Claus being the suspect in a crime. So and I've got an outline for like 2 seasons. I've got a mid-season spinoff that's focuses on the Tooth Fairy. Yeah, so it's a lot of fun. The people that I've run, what I've got by think it's great. And so I'm stoked about that project because it was another creative outlet. And it's just a hoot, So it's great.
And sometimes you need laughter when things aren't necessarily a good time right now with the way that the world is.
Absolutely. And I would eventually like this project if it could get any sort of kind of momentum, I would love to develop it into to a stream, some sort of streaming or a web series or something, just
right, because
it's a lot of fun, and I've got a lot of people who are really helping me out with it, and I think it's gonna launch on a network, a podcast network already. So there are a lot of pieces, and it's been really cool to kind of learn a new storytelling format, because at the end of the day, that's really what it's about. It's about, educating, entertaining, inspiring people. That's kind of what I get out of it. Getting paid is a good thing, but the thing that kind of drives me is that connectivity with the audience. And this is a way that I can couple comedy and the true crime genre is such a popular genre
right now. Yes, it very much is. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And kind of like taking a lighthearted approach, and and we're gonna every episode is gonna have a different nonprofit that we're gonna support and that sort of thing.
That's great too.
Yeah, so that we give back to the space, and so so that's a lot of fun. So those are kind of the top line projects that I've got going on right now.
Well, that's really cool. I'm proud of you. That's great.
Thanks, man. Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, I hope it turns out the way that it's kind of rattling around in here. I hope it turns out
right.
What
we'll do this last question here that I have for you. If you could give any advice for beginning writers, beginning screenwriters, what would you tell people just starting out with an inkling to do, to put I guess pen to paper, old school terms, and start world building, really, because that's what we do when we write. We're literally building worlds.
Well, I think there are a few things that I would say. First of all, don't be too hard on yourself. Like, get over yourself, because, I look back at the things I've written, 15, 20 years ago. And, you know, by current me, they're absolute garbage, right?
You can see your own growth,
absolutely,
which is definitely a good thing. And I think maybe people need to be a little bit more patient with themselves. Like you said, don't be so hard on yourself.
Absolutely. I mean, this does not happen. I mean, the thing that, you know, people see like, oh, I sold a screenplay, and that's a tweet. Somebody will tweet, I sold a screenplay, you know,
right.
What we don't see is those 20 years or 15 years or however many years, and how many different movies they watched, and how many different screenplays they read,
how many times they heard no, how many times. Yeah,
absolutely. How many times somebody told them that they sucked. And those sorts of things. You've got to believe, you've got to, not to sound too, you know, saccharine about it, you got to believe in your own voice, right? So you've got to also put in the work, because if you really believe in what you have to bring to the table, then you've got to work for it. So that's important. The other thing that's important is, you know, you can do all the writing in the world, but if nobody ever reads it, it doesn't matter. So you've got to network. You've got to, you know, get out from behind the keyboard and talk to people, and you have
to let people read your drafts. You have to learn how to take like feedback from people, right? Not just mom and dad or your best friend, right?
You got to you've got to take that constructive criticism and understand, like, you know, everybody's going to come at things with their own perspective, but, you know, those are all part of that growth. And I mean, the only reason that I've ever gotten anything produced is because I knew the right people at the right time. And you know, and I went to AFM a couple of years ago, and made a bunch of contacts out there, and have gotten paid work, you know, on other projects that have not been produced yet or in various stages of development, because, you know, I was able to go out and talk to people.
Just to be able to talk to people about, like, even just why you love writing. Like, people want to hear that stuff. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. There's a passion goes a long way. It can't take you the whole way, but it goes a long way.
It does.
And you do have to be able to, you know, put in the work and show commitment and be loyal to people. And you know, you can prove your value in a lot of different ways in this industry. So I think that's what I'd say.
Awesome. Well, hey, I just want to say it's really good talking to you, and thank you for being a part of this year. I really appreciate it. So, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Jason Usry, thanks, man.
Well, Matt, thank you so much. This has been an honor, and, you know, I think the world of you and everything that you're doing. So I really appreciate you including me.
Thanks, man. Thank you so much.